And Peter, when I spoke about the war last week, we were talking about how suddenly, all of a sudden, all of these professional signs suddenly start showing up everywhere. Are these signs and everything, this whole organizational network, it seems very professional. It seems to be completely non-organic. Why does this get charity status? It seems like this would be something that the Trump administration could really look at as a way to damage this network.
No, I think you're exactly right. And we've had conversations with senior officials in the Treasury Department exactly on this issue. The bottom line is a guy like Roy Singham gets a tax deduction when he donates to these radical causes, I would argue on behalf of China. And why are we giving him a tax deduction? Why are we giving him nonprofit status when, again, I would argue he's doing the bidding of a foreign power? There were even news reports that he was activating this network even before the United States and Israel started bombing Iran. And that has given speculation to the idea that maybe the Chinese government, Chinese satellites were aware that military operations were commencing, and that's maybe Roy Singham was told about it and activated accordingly. So I think the Treasury Department is key here because they can take out the reforms necessary.
Indeed, and of course, it all comes back to the importance that China places on Iran, because one of the things that we've seen here is Chinese technology going into the proving ground of battle and actually not doing that great. We've seen Chinese ships that were heavily dependent on Chinese technology now at the bottom of the ocean. We've seen Chinese air defense systems that, as one person said, work by blowing up when there's a missile near them. Is this showing that the Chinese military may be a bit more of a paper tiger than we had thought or feared?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And I think this is a big concern for Beijing. Let's remember, Beijing gave to Iran their most advanced air defense systems, highly touted. They didn't end up doing anything. They didn't shoot down a single American or Israeli plane, and they were destroyed by the air forces. There are intelligence systems that China has set up in Iran that didn't work. And this, to me, is reminiscent of what happened during the Cold War back in 1982. The Israeli Air Force and the then Syrian Air Force squared off above Lebanon that year. The Israelis were flying American F-15s, and the Syrians were flying MiG-25s. The Israelis won that air war by shooting down 82 MiGs without suffering a single casualty. Yes, the pilot training was key, but the technology was important as well. But what happened after that is the Soviet ability to sell their arms and to gain that revenue and to gain a political advantage with the countries buying those weapons kind of evaporated. Because if you're in the developing world, why do you want the second best weapon system when you might be facing the first a weapon system? So I anticipate that this is a major concern for China as it looks to trying to sell arms abroad and also use those arms sales to advance their political agenda.
Well, Peter, I would go a step further, and I'd love your thoughts on this. But, for years now, at least a couple of decades, we've seen China more and more chauvinistically saying the West is in decline, the United States is in decline, China is rising. You want to tie up with us because the 21st century will be the Chinese century. Now, this seems to shift that narrative quite a bit. And people who watch the show know that I have been putting for a long time Venezuela, Cuba, now Iran into the context of confronting China without confronting China. What do you make of that? Is this the ultimate Trump strategy? And when you see things like the news which broke a little while ago that China is apparently banning exports of jet fuel and petroleum products, it says to me that they may know they've got a real problem here.
Yeah, I think they have a huge problem here. Just look at the competition that's taking place in artificial intelligence right now. And you would wonder, what does this have to do with Venezuela and Iran? Actually, a fair amount, because the two big tech infrastructure companies for China that are central to the AI race for them are Huawei and ZTE. These are the big conglomerates that create the networks that you need for artificial intelligence networks to work. Well, both of those companies, huge contractors in Venezuela and Iran, and they are now looking at losing tens of billions of dollars in revenue because they have large projects in scale in both of those countries. And guess what? They're not going to get paid for them. So the implications for China's sort of top-down, what I call market Leninist system, which is kind of a blend of the market but dictated by Leninist control, has now been completely thrown into disarray. And what's happened is that the United States has picked off two of their biggest allies in the developing world, Venezuela and Iran, and China has been helpless to do anything about it. Any thought that they had of retaking Taiwan, for example, they now face the dilemma that the United States is in firm control of the Straits of Hormuz, and between 40 and 50% of all of China's energy, whether it comes from Iran, whether it comes from Saudi Arabia, goes through the Straits of Hormuz. So you could have a scenario where China decides to attack Taiwan and the United States says, guess what? No oil from this region is going to China. And then they are in deep, deep trouble. So the amount of leverage that Donald Trump now has over China going into what is supposed to be a meeting between these two presidents, not too far away, the entire equation, I think, of that conversation has shifted to Trump's advantage.
Do you think, though, just coming out of that meeting, we know that Trump is a great deal maker. You know that he's transactional as well as principled for America. Do you see some sort of rapprochement, maybe some sort of détente with China saying, maybe we've bitten off more than we can chew. We need to, both sides, calm this down?
Well, I think that's going to be China's line. I'm skeptical about negotiated solutions with China because they don't honor them. Trump negotiated the purchase of American agricultural products, a whole bunch of agreements with China in his first term. China didn't honor any of them. China said they were going to deal with precursor chemicals and the Chinese industrial involvement in fentanyl. They didn't do any of that. That was back in 2017. So I don't see any evidence that when China says, hey, let's make a deal, let's stick to that deal, I don't see any evidence that they are going to do so. So my advice to Donald Trump, of course, he's not asking for it, would be to be skeptical of any proposed deal by China and continue with an assertive foreign policy that does not directly challenge China, but continues in this competition between the two powers to take the initiative and to take advantage of what is China's clear vulnerability and weakness in this economic space. We started the year by them threatening with rare earth minerals. We are now in the scenario where they have a deep vulnerability when it comes to energy. We've talked about oil. Let's remember, they import a lot of coal from Iran, and that coal is what they use to fuel their data centers for AI. So they've got major vulnerabilities in ways that we haven't even fully appreciated right now.
Peter Schweizer, I think you're absolutely correct. Love having you on the program. Thank you so much for joining me, and everybody out there, go find Peter Schweizer's books and everything else online now.